Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2026 People and Planet United Global Health and Purpose Summit. It's a pleasure to be joining you today as part of this global conversation, bringing together leaders across health, sustainability, and innovation to explore how we can drive better outcomes for both people and the planet. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce today's speaker, Monica McBride, Director of Global Partnerships for Environment and Landscapes at Bayer. Monica brings a global perspective at the intersection of environmental sustainability, agriculture, and health, with a strong focus on building partnerships that advance more resilient and sustainable systems. Her work reflects the core idea behind this summit, that human and planetary health are deeply interconnected. Today, Monica will speak on regenerative agriculture, restoring ecosystems while increasing productivity. This is particularly timely as we face unprecedented challenges. Global population expected to grow by 2.2 billion people by 2050, requiring 50% more food production, while simultaneously confronting climate change impacts, water scarcity, and soil degradation. Monica's approach to regenerative agriculture offers a compelling path forward, one that doesn't force us to choose between productivity and sustainability, but rather demonstrates how we can produce more and restore more simultaneously. This represents exactly the kind of systems thinking we need to address the complex challenges facing our food systems today. Monica, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and I'm honored to facilitate this important conversation. I'll now turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Tom, for that introduction and for really helping to set the stage for what I'm about to discuss here today. So I really want to thank also the people in Planet United for having me here at the Global Health and Purpose Summit to talk about this really, I think, important topic, really at that intersection of food, agriculture, and health as well. So to get things started, I'll just give a quick overview of what I plan to walk through today. So as Tom mentioned, I'm with Bayer. I'm in our crop science division, so very focused on the agricultural side of the business. And we have been doing a lot of thinking around what does the future of agriculture look like? What does it need? And how does it address all of those challenges that Tom raised in his introduction? And so really going to set the stage with why does it matter? Why are we focusing on regenerative agriculture? What does regenerative agriculture mean? I think that's also a big topic and outstanding question that many might have. And really, what is Bayer's response to this? How do we, as an input provider, a leading R&D engine in the agriculture and crop science space, fit into this picture? And then how are we specifically contributing to it? And so I'll highlight a few of our innovations that are in the pipeline or actually out there in the field with growers that are really trying to improve profitability for growers, productivity, and again, this restoration aspect of it. So why does it matter? And I think Tom did a great job of painting the picture here, but human health and nutrition really depend on the health of our planet and the health of our plants that we are growing. Yet global food systems are increasingly coming under pressure from climate change and the loss of natural resources. Many have probably seen the statistics out there around the loss of biodiversity being in the 60 to 70% range. And agriculture, just like other sectors of the economy, must become more resilient in this volatile world and to remain and increase productivity into the future. As many have seen, there have been extremes in weather that are really impacting the ability of our growers to produce at the same level. So just to highlight again some of those key statistics to really hit the point home around why it matters. We are projected to have a global population increase by 2.2 billion by 2050. That's a lot more people and probably a lot more affluent people that we are going to need to feed. And as affluence and population rise, the types of calories are going to be denser. They're going to be more protein, more animal proteins, which require a lot more food and feed and acreage to really achieve this. So we have that 50% more food challenge that we are trying to meet. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of pressure on ecosystems to really be able to deliver this 50% increase. We have a 2.2 billion harvest loss from climate change. That's an estimate, and that's only going to continue to get worse as climate change continues, as we continue to see those impacts from climate change. We have a 20% loss in arable land per capita by 2050 predicted. So we're going to also have to start producing more on less land. And 90% of soils are estimated to be degraded by 2050 as well. So we're really facing a crisis in the agriculture sector. And so that is why we have started to really focus on regenerative agriculture as one way to help address these pressures that we are seeing in the market, and that I should say our customers, our farmers, are really seeing in the market. And just a few more statistics I think are really valuable to help ground the conversation. 61% of farmers have experienced revenue losses from adverse weather. So over half of our growers out there who are providing food for us every day are already feeling these effects. Also, 91% have already tried at least one regenerative agriculture practice. And I'll get into what those practices are later in the presentation. But they're feeling this pain and they really are trying to already address it. They're ahead of the curve when it comes to climate mitigation and adaptation. And then 75% of growers are worried about the effects that these changing weather patterns and climate change are going to have on the future sustainability and profitability of their operation. So we really are a bit in crisis mode when you look at the rural landscape. So then what is Bayer doing? As a leading innovator in the crop science space, we really feel we need to help our growers address these pain points and really be able to grow into the future to meet the demands of the population and the demand for the types of calories that population is going to want to have. So our solution that we are just starting on the journey of is really how do we produce that 50% more that is needed? And it's by restoring nature and scaling regenerative agriculture. And so when we say restoring nature, it's really taking a look at how do we reduce the impacts that are happening today from climate change? How do we decrease our impact on that overall climate change picture? How do we also improve the amount of water that our plants need to grow? How do we reduce the water productivity or improve the water productivity of our crops to help growers really weather some of these extremes we're seeing in water availability and predictability? And then really also focusing on the grower. We have a goal to empower 100 million smallholder farmers by 2030. And that is really the smallholders are the backbone of agriculture worldwide. And so it's important that they have the tools they need, they have the resources they need to produce both for themselves, but then for also the populations that they are supporting. And so then when it comes to scaling regenerative agriculture, we have our definition on this next slide of what that actually means. So regenerative agriculture to us is first and foremost increasing yields and improving productivity of the farmer. That has to be the core, or we're not going to be able to achieve the other environmental and social benefits that we see coming with regenerative agriculture. And I've also taken the opportunity here, because I know that the SDGs are coming due in a couple of years, to showcase just a few of the key SDGs that we also align with when we've outlined this framework. So you can see here, SDG number 2, really that ending hunger piece of the puzzle is front and center. It really gets to that need that we're trying to address as well with the growing population. So after we've defined that yield and productivity are really number 1, enhancing social and economic well-being of farmers and communities is number 2, and that speaks a lot to that 100 million smallholder target that we already have in place. And this will continue to be a focus for us going forward. If you don't have prosperous farmers and you don't have prosperous communities that support them, then again, the agriculture sector starts to become very in peril, and that's not something that we need given all of the pressures we're seeing in the food system. Finally, to get to some of the environmental impacts that we are really using to define regenerative agriculture, the top one is improved soil health. So that statistic you saw on the previous slide is showing that 90% of our soils could be degraded by 2050. So soil health is paramount here. You need to have healthy soil to have healthy plants. And so that's really become more of a focus for us internally around how do we ensure that our products on the market not only today help farmers improve soil health, but looking into the future, how they can have even more of an impact on that. And in addition to that, one aspect of soil health is really the sequestration potential of the soil as it becomes more improved. And so climate change mitigation and adaptation, really helping growers sequester more with the types of practices that they're adopting, and also weather some of the climate change impacts. So those severe weather events is really a focus for our strategy as well. And then finally, preservation and restoration of biodiversity on farm. While farms in general are not meant to be incredibly biodiverse, they are meant to produce crops. There are benefits to crop rotations, to planting additional types of species around your crops that can have significant benefits on the crop itself as well. So really trying to understand for specific landscapes, what are the most appropriate aspects that can be adopted to really enhance that biodiversity on farm. And then finally, conservation of water. This is a big one when we think about climate change because the water will become more unpredictable. You could have huge rain events followed by severe drought. And so really trying to understand how do we conserve the water, especially in the soil, is key to what we are looking at as well in some of our trials. And so how do we get to these outcomes? You'll see here that it's really the combination of our seeds and traits technology with our crop protection and our digital tools to really provide this holistic system to our farmers and our customers to help them achieve these outcomes. And so now I'll get into a little bit more of the specifics around what products we have, both in the market now and that are in the pipeline that are really helping us drive growers to be able to achieve these outcomes. And before I get into the specifics, I also mentioned that I wanted to just highlight some of the practices that are typically associated with regenerative agriculture. So while Bayer takes a very outcome-focused approach to defining regenerative agriculture around those 6 outcomes, in order to achieve those, there are some accepted practices across the industry that really can be adopted to start to drive those outcomes. And the first one is cover cropping or keeping the soil covered all year round. It doesn't necessarily have to be something called a cover crop, but really what you want to have is a living root in the soil all year round to help retain moisture, keep soil structure, and improve the overall soil health. The second one also gets to that soil health piece. So minimal or no tillage. This really helps again with moisture retention, soil structure, and really helps improve a lot of the microbial benefits and nutrients in the soil as well. Natural fertilization. This is one that many often think of when they think of introduction of livestock either back to the land or keeping livestock on the land. So really utilizing some of those circular benefits of animals and the nutrients that they produce to help add more nutrients back to the soil. And then finally, some of the planting methods, so planting depths, planting density, these are things that we are looking at as well to figure out how do we optimize the system. How can you plant maybe one crop within another crop as well, so that you can time harvests and growth of that subsequent crop. Again, getting to the ability to also help with some of the cover cropping and keeping the soil covered all year round. So now the part that I like to talk about the most, but our building blocks and our innovations that we have in this space. So as I mentioned, what we see today is really this combination of crop protection, seeds and traits, and digital enablement. And so that's where we are starting from. As we look to the future, we have specific products that are going to help enable a lot of those practices that were presented on the previous slide. So first and foremost here is our new short stature corn system. And what it does is it really helps enable growers get into the field at different points throughout the growing season to allow them to put on precise application of crop protection, for example, when they need it, or nutrients, fertilizer when they need it, instead of having to apply at the beginning of the season and then just letting it grow because they can't access it because it gets too tall at the times when they would actually need to get into the field. Also, with it being lower, it provides the ability to get in later in the season to allow for cover cropping. And so this was another one of those regenerative practices that's really important to keep the soil covered year round. And so this shorter corn allows growers to get into the season, into the field when they wouldn't typically be able to, and really access, unlock those benefits that you're going to see with cover cropping. Another key one I'll highlight here that's more future looking is really some of the opportunities that we're seeing with winter cover crops that can actually be harvested as cash crops. And so those are what we're calling our winter oilseed portfolio and really our biofuels work. So what right now, if growers are planting just a traditional cover crop, they typically have to terminate it at the end of the season, or they might be able to use it for grazing for livestock. But what we are seeing is that if you can turn that cover crop into an even more valuable opportunity at the end of the season and use it for such outputs as renewable diesel or sustainable aviation fuel, you can get even more value out of the land and increase the number of crops you have in a short period of time. and achieve some of those outcomes that we mentioned before around regenerative agriculture. So that one's one of the more exciting innovations we have in the pipeline, and we do have some growers already starting to grow some of this. So this will be our first year where we start to see some of those harvests and some of these crops going for renewable fuel production. So really what we are seeing is that farms of the future will have to be comprised of these regenerative cropping systems. You will have to have multiple crops within your rotation. You will really be focusing on reducing the amount that you disturb the soil, the time that the soil is kept covered and has that living root, because soil health is really the foundation for the future of food production to meet those lofty goals and those 50% increase in food production targets that we are seeing as the population grows. And so here are just three examples of what we're seeing again globally as we work in this regenerative agriculture space. So in the US, I mentioned already the Precision corn. What we are seeing as part of that system is if you can plant this shorter stature corn, you could follow it by a biofuel crop, such as a winter camelina, which is one that we are looking at, or covercress, which is a new company coming to market that has a domesticated pennycress. And then you can include a new soy hybrid in that rotation to get that benefit of having the soil covered and having those three crops instead of just two within a rotational period. And then when we look to Latin America, it's a very similar thinking. They obviously have different growing conditions. They're a more tropical region. They have longer seasons. They can grow more crops within one rotation. And so there it is less about necessarily adding a crop to a rotation since they're optimizing, but really trying to optimize the system. And so we have work down there that's mostly digital focused to help growers improve the health of their soil, reduce the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production of their grain, and then really trying to put that on the market to get a premium or at least recognition for some of the environmental benefits that they are providing in that region. And then finally, another really interesting technology that I'll highlight more on the next slide is the work that we are doing with direct seeded rice in India and the APAC region more broadly, so Asia Pacific. And with that direct seeded rice, you can also put that in a rotation with wheat and potatoes, which are two of the other big staple crops in that region, to increase their productivity and their yield potential as well. So it's really a win-win to address a lot of the farmer pain points that we're seeing in that production region. And I'll get into some of those shortly. But just a deeper dive right here, again, into the system that I mentioned in North America. With this Precision short stature, you're really seeing yield preservation as a result of the shorter stature during high wind events in certain parts of the US. So that's one thing I didn't mention with the climate change impacts, but not only are you going to see the severe weather from a rain and water perspective, but you're also starting to see more heavy winds more frequently in certain parts of the country, and that can result in lodging of crops, so really knocking them down. And so you lose all of that harvest when that happens. And so our shorter stature has shown that in these high wind events, you get significantly less lodging, which preserves the crop and increases yields. And then I mentioned already some of the other benefits that this has, but really wanted to show in this slide and illustrate just that systems perspective that we are taking with our crops. So it's no longer thinking about one product within the field and how it improves the grower's experience, but really thinking across the system. How do we optimize? How do we think like a grower? They're working with an acre, and so how do we help them optimize on that acre? And so I will just wrap up with one final example of our direct seeded rice, because it's such a great story of both the human health, meeting those needs, the labor shortage needs that we're seeing in this region, and also some of the environmental benefits. So typically in India, most of the rice is planted in a transplanted fashion, which means the field is flooded. They have to physically transplant the seeds from the nursery into the field, and it's very labor intensive and very water intensive. And what we have developed is hybrid seeds that perform just as well, if not better, than the transplanted seeds in a drier seeding environment. So you no longer have to flood the field. You can use mechanized equipment to go in and actually do the seeding like you would of a corn or a soy in the US. And so it takes out both the backbreaking nature of a lot of that type of labor, but also the need for having as much labor in the field. And so that was really one of the big pain points that we were trying to address with this technology. But as a result of addressing that pain point, we also see many other sustainability benefits as well. So you see a 22 to 30% water savings with this overall, higher soil organic carbon and soil nitrogen, so soil health benefits, and then finally a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. When you flood rice fields, you produce a significant amount of methane, which has a high global warming potential. And when you're able to reduce the amount that you have to flood, you reduce those methane emissions. And so what we're seeing is a 4 to 8 ton reduction in carbon dioxide equivalents. So translating methane into carbon dioxide per hectare. So a really big climate mitigation story there. So with that, I just want to thank you again about for the time today, and I'm excited to get some questions from Tom.
Thanks so much, Monica. That was great. You mentioned in terms of the climate solutions, you had mentioned the winter oilseed business that's bringing intermediate crops to market for biodiesel and sustainable aviation fuel production. Can you speak more specifically about how innovations like this and other elements of your portfolio are contributing to climate adaptation and mitigation, particularly as farmers face the reality that 75% already are worried about climate change effects?
Absolutely. So with our winter oilseeds business, and I'll actually maybe take a step back and say that the airline industry and that sector in general has a lot of impact on global emissions. I don't have the number top of mind, but I want to say it's at least around 5%. And they do not have a lot of options for climate mitigation. Replacing jet fuel is a really hard thing to do. And so one of the best opportunities that we are seeing is really this potential for winter oil seeds to reduce that carbon intensity, if you will, of the fuels that are being used for transport. I don't think air transport is going away, so it's really how do we find those opportunities to make the impact on the climate less. And sustainable aviation fuel, which is made from oil seeds, is one of those options. And so currently, with just looking at soy and canola, which are the traditional oil seeds, you would not be able to meet the demands that we're seeing from the EU, for example. They have regulations in place that are really driving airlines to increase the amount of sustainable aviation fuel they're using. And the same with CORSIA, which is part of the International Civil Aviation Organization. So really a global compact that is driving demand as well for these oil seeds. And so we see this intermediate oil seed business, so not having to take additional natural habitat out of production to increase the amount of oil seeds that are produced, but rather incorporating them into land that is already part of production as a win-win for climate adaptation and mitigation, because it's also helping the growers by improving their soil health and really helping with that adaptation part of it, while also helping on the mitigation side with reducing the carbon intensity of fuel that's being used for airline transport.
Got it. I mean, it's fascinating. As a former member of the United States Air Force, I love talking about jet fuel. So
And that
I
is
love.
another, big source as well. Yeah, the Department of Defense is absolutely looking into these types of oils as well. So for
Well,
energy
that's good.
security. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. And in terms of some of the success stories that you hear from farmers, with 91% of farmers already using regenerative practices and having such openness to new approaches, I think we'd love to hear about some of the positive feedback you've received from growers who are already seeing these benefits firsthand. I mean, what's been most encouraging in your conversations with them?
I would say if you're able to get them over the first 3 or 4 years of the learning curve to adopting some of these practices and really having the soil adjust to the new way of production, you typically see them stay the course. So what we've heard is that the most important piece of the puzzle for those first few years is both having financial support, whether that's from governments, the value chain, input providers, insurance providers, So that's one piece. They really need to be financially supported. And then second, they really need a peer-to-peer support network. So growers that are in their region that understand their local constraints, weather, helping them through this process because these peers have already adopted it and already seen success. And so those are really the two keys that we are seeing to enabling adoption and then sustaining adoption. But once they adopt it, we've heard multiple stories where they're never going to go back because they just see the change in their soil health, their yield, and not only is it better yields, but yield stability over time. So they're able to weather those impacts of changes in rainfall, weather events, that their neighbors are not, who have not adopted those practices.
Got it. And then finally, just on the global partnership approach that you talked about, as you work toward empowering smallholder farmers worldwide, I think you talked about 100 million smallholder farmers worldwide. What are some of the partnership approaches that have been most effective in making these innovations accessible and relevant across different farming communities and regions?
Yeah, so one of the big initiatives that we have in the smallholder community is something called Better Life Farming. And really, what it does is provides local individuals an entrepreneurial opportunity to stand up a small kiosk, if you will, to sell better seeds, better inputs to the local growers. It's not just Bayer products, it's all products, but it's better products than they would traditionally have access to, while also providing technical support and financial support as well. So, really trying to pull all of those threads together that are needed to make adoption of these new technologies successful into a one-stop shop in these communities. And again, it provides someone in the community then also with a labor and an ability to make money. And so it's that entrepreneurial aspect of it that's really helped it grow. And so that's one of the key projects and partnerships that we have to really help empower smallholders.
Well, Monica, the work you're doing is so important. I really hope you'll come back and tell us about the progress that you and Bear are making at our next event and just kind of keep us in the know on this. I found it fascinating. I'm sure everybody watching did too. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And I'd love to come back and share more success stories. We're, as I mentioned at the beginning, just really starting this journey. So, yeah, in a few years, we'll probably have some exciting results to share.
Great. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.